Ayo, Babs, this shit crazy. Jimmy on the beat, boy.
People, this is the Trophy Room. It's Thursday, August 11th. Thanks for hanging out with us. Today I'm telling you about a celebrity I talked with on Twitter that Jackson hates. We're going to tell you whether or not Russell Westbrook has anything to prove, one special moron that turned down $85 million for $6 million instead, and breaking news on the chaos going on in Dallas. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, please go give us a 5-star review. It would help out a ton. Get a screenshot, share us on your story. Go support the boys. I'm your host, Brett Hammer, alongside a man who's fired up about his favorite Uncle Colin. That's Jackson Garlitz. Jackson with an X instead of that CKS. Go find him on YouTube. Search Jackson Garlitz, first one up. And you can catch me on Instagram at bhammertime with the letter E at the end with that extra E. People, we've also expanded to YouTube, so if that's where you like to consume your podcast, or you like diving down rabbit holes, feel free to go hang out with us, go subscribe. We would love that. Jackson, what is it that's got you so fired up today?
Listen, we need to define some words real quick for some people. Today, we might be doing a little bit of math, and we might be doing a little bit of reading and, explaining and figuring some things out. So it might feel like we're back in school, but hang with us. Colin Cowherd did a segment about Ben Simmons, and I agree with the premise of the problem with Ben Simmons. I actually agree with Colin's take here. Ben Simmons has had multiple years with multiple stars. Jimmy Butler, right? He has a really good supporting cast, and he has Joel Embiid, who is probably the most dominant big man that I've seen since probably Shaq, in terms of just pure athletic dominance. And dude is not a threat from anywhere outside, outside of 10 feet, we don't care, right? We don't fear him. Here's my issue. I hear this term thrown around a lot. The term, I'm pro player. And not I'm pro player as in I'm a professional player, but I'm pro player in the sense that I'm for the players as compared to the executives. And I think it's one of the most, probably one of the most dishonest terms in sports that we use.
Dishonest.
In what we mean. Because here's the thing. Brett, do you know anybody who's pro executive or pro franchise or not pro fan, not as a fan of the Utah Jazz, but for me, right?
To coin a phrase of yours, it depends.
Right. So if I give you this example, right?
Okay.
Do you know anybody who stooges for, let's think. Do you know anybody who stooges for Clippers management? Not the Clippers as a team, but Clippers management.
No, I think the Clippers are dumb for continuing to play Paul George and Kawhi Leonard together.
Right, but you don't know anybody in that conversation, right, who in a conversation, people will have conversations about Kawhi Leonard's contract. You would argue, though, that there aren't people there's not really any people out there who don't want Kawhi Leonard to be paid. They're annoyed that their team is paying for him. But
I was going to say, I think they're paying way too much for him, but it's not my team, so I don't care.
Right, but you don't have a problem with Kawhi Leonard being paid.
No.
Right, and I don't know anybody.
I'm a pro-capitalism person.
Right, and I think most everybody is. So when I hear this thing where it's I'm pro player, as compared to what? You know what I mean? I don't know any real humans who don't want players to get paid. They might be annoyed when teams in their situation pay certain players, but I don't know anybody who has a problem with LeBron James getting paid. I don't know anybody who has a problem inherently with players getting paid for what they're worth.
I don't think there's a single sports fan unless it comes to an argument of being a diehard sports fan, and then you see a certain player as your enemy, so to speak, and therefore you want management to get rid of them. You're correct in saying what you said, but I also don't think it's never a 100% down the line rule. It's I agree with it this time, or I agree with it this time. But you can hop either side of that, and I don't even really think there's a line down the middle separating pro player and pro executive. I think it just depends on the situation. Was that the right move? Are you on the right side of history? But I don't think it's 100%. Some people are pro athlete and some people are pro executive.
I 100% agree with that, and this is my point. When we say things like "I'm pro player," that doesn't mean anything. I'm pro player actually is usually used by people who stooge for players. regardless of what happens. That's the people like Nick Wright say things like I'm pro player, and that's my problem. Is within the context of you and I, like we were talking about this, right? Zach Wilson, right? You don't think Zach Wilson is going to work long term the way the Jets think that he's going to.
I don't.
Right. I think that he will. You and I, neither one of us really believe that if Zach Wilson doesn't do well, that the Jets shouldn't pay him. Right?
Yeah, I know he should get his. I mean, he probably shouldn't get an extension, but he should get his money that he signed the contract for originally. That's how America works.
Right, and if he plays super well, he should get that extension. If he plays super well, would you agree?
Yeah. If he plays really well, he deserves an extension.
Right, and so that's my problem when I hear I'm pro player.
Actually, I disagree with you, but I'll let you finish your thought.
So here's my problem. When it comes to I'm pro player is usually something that's said by people who stooge for players, like Nick Wright or Skip Bayless, right? People who generally say I'm pro player are people who choose to have specific blind spots about players that they like or players in general when it comes to any situation with management. I believe that Colin Cowherd, right, is like correct in being like Ben Simmons doesn't have any like work ethic as compared to the rest of the NBA. I think that there's enough evidence and data there for us to look at it and say, hey, like Ben Simmons doesn't have any work ethic in relation to his jump shot. But that's because we are looking at data and we're looking at evidence and we're seeing, hey, Ben Simmons does not work on his jump shot. And that's the problem. Somebody who says I'm pro player, it's weird, as if there's anybody on the other side of that debate. There's nobody who's anti-player. You know what I mean?
I would present it to you like this, but first of all, so I teased at the very beginning that I have interacted with a celebrity that you hate. I have talked to Colin Cowherd on Twitter. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if anyone knows that, but I have Twitter, I have tweets, and I have DMs of me and Colin Cowherd. I'll show you this one right here because this is the one I got. But that's a tweet. That's Colin Cowherd replying to one of my tweets. That's Colin Cowherd right there at the bottom. Gave me a fist bump on an emoji. So just a little flex. This is where I would submit to you, because the whole reason that we're having this conversation is because Colin Cowherd came out and said, oh, well, I'm usually pro player, but because of the way Ben Simmons is and all the things that 76ers have done for him, he's just throwing them to the wind. And so therefore, like, because I'm usually pro player, I'm not pro Ben Simmons, but that doesn't make me like going back on what I believe. I would submit this to you. I am pro player the same way that I'm pro anyone making money. I want to make the most money that I possibly can. Therefore, I'm in support of everyone else making the most money that they possibly can. Some people work harder for it. Some people are born with better qualities. Some people are born into better situations. Correct? But here's where I would disagree with you. And I don't think I'm the majority in this, so I think that your argument holds a lot of water. If you cost me too much money, I'm not pro player. Like, I'm not pro Michael Thomas because Michael Thomas costs way too much. I'm not pro Ezekiel Elliott. And I think Ezekiel Elliott's a great running back and doesn't have any serious off the field issues anymore that warrant him not being wanted. But this is my issue with Ezekiel Elliott. He costs you too much money. And I am a minority in this, but I have learned from Tom Brady in a way that I don't think a lot of people have. And I went off about this yesterday, but like salary cap, the way salary cap works is you basically have fixed percentages where if you command 50% of our salary cap, that means I only have 50% to pay an entire rest of the team. So my issue is I'm pro player as a capitalist, but I'm pro team, pro executive, pro front office when it comes to winning championships, because you don't get to win championships and make money. It doesn't work.
But I would submit that pro player, right, inhibits that. Like it suggests that there's sides here, and what you're talking about is different than sides. It's nuance. You know what I mean? The what you talk about is context, right? When you and I talk about things, right? One of the things I appreciate, like when I talk to you, you're about context. You're about, okay, yes, right here, like this situation applies, but you also have to add the details to get the full picture to understand what's going on. Because it's a principle.
It's not an extreme. To quote Star Wars, only Siths deal in extremes. Or what is it? Is that what they say?
Yeah, I think that's it.
So, yeah, like, it's not all the time, every single way. It's this way.
So here's my problem, right? So the idea that I'm pro player suggests that there is an opposite side that's pro executive. Like you and I discussed, I don't know if there's anybody who's like anti-player or like extremely pro-executive. There are people who are fans of their team and want their team to not do stupid things, right? Or want teams in general to not do stupid things. And we can have objective, like we had the conversation, right, that you referenced, Michael Thomas. We talked about that. I'm not a Saints fan. Neither are you, right? And you and I both look at that. We're not anti-player, right? You and I also want people to get paid. But we can look at the Michael Thomas situation and be like, man, he's not playing a whole lot for somebody who's getting paid a lot of money. You know what I mean? And so the term that we use when we say I'm pro player to me, it's like you can be objective about a situation and you can take a look at it, and you can even be subjective about a situation. You can look at something. I look at things as a Jazz fan. So every single time that I see somebody in the Western Conference sign someone that's really good, I get really depressed because I'm like, man, it's going to make the playoffs so much harder and we already suck at playoffs. You know what I mean? Like I'm looking at that through the lens of a Jazz fan, but I'm not anti-player. I'm glad that person got their money. I hope that they never get injured. I hope they have all the success in the world except when they play us, right? And so this idea that like there's pro player and anti-player is just, I find like when it comes to like pro player like movement, right? People who are pro player movement, that typically is.
I think that's a different argument though.
Right, but like I'm saying pro player, like when they talk about movement, I'm not talking like specifically pro player movement because I'm also like, I agree with pro player movement, but the idea is like, if you have the perception that you and I disagree with, right? You and I don't agree with this. We've talked about it before. Super teams. You and I don't agree with that premise, right? But if somebody has the idea that, hey, I don't love how players team up together, right? And they feel like it's bad for the sport, that doesn't make them anti-player. It means that there's a specific thing here that they don't agree with, but them disagreeing with super teams has nothing really to do with being anti or pro player. It's about they have an opinion on super teams and they disagree with people, which is the same with you and I. You and I have conversations, right? Like we disagree on things, but that doesn't make you or I pro or anti-player. It means that we have an opinion on something. And at no point, I hate the anti-player thing because it feels like a stooge thing.
I don't think there's a pro executive, but I do think there's an anti-player. And like we talked about the other day, just because something isn't one way doesn't make it automatically the other way. This is what I mean. Because you talked about how you just outlined why people dislike super teams, and that it's not necessarily their anti-player movement, but it's just they dislike super teams as a whole. I do think the game you and I have watched the past 10 years, like the game you and I watched as teenagers, basically starting from the time LeBron James moved to Miami until now, right? I talked about this yesterday, has changed basketball. To now, people will conglomerate and build teams together under, like, players have essentially become GMs where they build their own teams. Whereas back in the day, before you and I were even born, that wasn't how it was. You didn't do that. And so I would argue, yes, there might not be people who are pro executive, but I do think there are people who are anti-player because they believe that the player is a fixture of the team that drafted them, and that they shouldn't have any power to do what they want, that the team should be able to do exactly what they want with them. And so from that perspective, I do think there are people who are anti-player. Not a lot of people. I think those people are the minority because basketball in the game has changed and sports fans tend to be a little bit more progressive in the way that they are okay with the game, especially basketball. Football is a little bit different. But I do think there are people who are anti-player.
Right, but I actually would even disagree that that's anti-player because I think the thing we talked about earlier, context and nuance, you and I, again, like we're not anti-Michael Thomas. We look at the situation and we make a judgment of they're paying Michael Thomas too much money for the production that they're getting, right? That isn't an anti-player stance. That's if I was the organization, I would be super irritated with the situation, right? And it's the same thing here where I think like even that one, most of the time, this is usually what I hear, the argument is, as a player, you're the employee of the organization, and so they can do what they want, right? Is usually what we hear. And I would say, like, even that one, players, I don't even hear the most extreme and rabid individuals who argue that, like, people need to stay places after they've fulfilled all the way through their rookie contract. There are people who are mad about it because they've left. Because
But I think that's because the narrative has changed. Because I think back in the day, that's the way it used to be, and now it's evolving. That's why I think you don't hear that many people who say that anymore, because those people are the minority.
Sure, but I think my basic tenet is that pro player is super broad, when in reality, there's not really people who are anti-player. There are people who are anti-aspects of player behavior, but that's, again, a conversation that we can pretty much apply anywhere, right? Like even like that one, right? Like player movement. They may not like player movement, but they want they want the person on their team to get paid. And so that doesn't seem
though, or do they just want their team to be the most successful as possible, and so they want to keep that person regardless of how they do it? Because that's the whole thing with the franchise tag. That's like, when fans want their team to franchise tag a certain guy, it's not because they care about how much money that guy's going to make when he gets franchise tagged. I would even argue that most fans don't understand how the franchise tag actually works, other than it essentially handcuffs you to a team. When fans view the franchise tag in football, they just say, "Oh, sweet, we got the player back." I don't care. I don't think most fans, when you're a fan of the team, it's different when you're a fan of the game. When you're a fan of the team, you want basically like everyone who's the best to be just enslaved to your team. So you pay them the least amount of money, which means you can get the most amount of talent. I don't think those people are the majority, but I do think those people exist.
Right, but then why is it that every single sports fan isn't now anti-player? Right, under that logic, if I want my team to do well, even potentially at the financial expense of the player, right? Because we'll put it this way, right?
Because the game has changed.
Right, but let's put it this way. Dennis Schroeder.
Yeah.
Right? Dennis Schroeder turned down $84 million for $6 million.
Yeah.
Right? And we've been laughing about it the whole
think he's
time.
an idiot.
Right. Are you and I, if he had gotten $84 million, would you have had a problem with that? Like with him getting $84 million, not like the team situation, but with him getting $84 million.
No, I don't have a problem with anyone making money, but I'm telling you, you and I agree. The only thing we disagree on is the game has changed, and that's why there's not anyone who has a problem with this anymore. Whereas I think back in the day, because that was the whole reason that they didn't want to pay Scotty. Like they didn't want to pay Scotty, and nobody had a problem with that. But like we saw that in The Last Dance, and nobody had an issue with that because they wanted, like, they wanted Michael to have more money, and they didn't really care. They just wanted the Bulls to win.
Right, but in that situation, you and I, like looking at that, we may disagree with the Bulls' decision, like they don't want to pay him more, but that doesn't mean that we don't want Scotty to get paid. It's that the Bulls don't, the Bulls in that context do not think that it is worthwhile for them to pay him a certain amount of money that they don't think he's worth. And I don't think that that's anti-player. I think that that's...
Yeah, but you can't have both. Like, you can't believe that you want him to get paid and believe that the Bulls are justified. Like, I don't think that dichotomy works.
Wait, but like, how though? Because here's my contention, right? It is okay for you to say, like, to Dennis Schroeder, right? Taking like him into example.
Yeah.
If Dennis Schroeder got paid $84 million, I don't have a problem with that. Any team doing that. If the Jazz paid him $84 million, I'd be pissed because as a Jazz fan, I don't think that that's productive long-term for my team.
But does that doesn't make you anti-player? Because you're he should be able to make as much money as he wants.
Right, but within the context of how it works for both sides. The problem is that I see like there's nuance here, and I think that the problem is when I see pro player, right? It's if there's anything ever that a player does that fans are like, I don't think that was, take your pick, financially smart, off the field smart. I don't think that Michael Thomas recovering from his injury, like trying to do rehab and then doing a surgery, which screws the Saints, right? I don't think having an opinion on those things makes you anti-player. I think it means that you're looking at the situation and you have a problem with it. When I hear anti, there's a bias against, right? And I don't think that it's a problem for somebody to look at a situation and say, hey, I hope Dennis Schroeder gets paid, but I hope it's not on my team, right? Because it hurts our chances. I don't think that that's anti-player. I think that that's you as a fan saying this would not be good for our team. Versus like somebody who's anti-player would have a problem with Dennis Schroeder getting paid $84 million anywhere because they don't believe that he should be paid that much money. It's that boomer argument that you hear every once in a while from somebody who's like, man, these players who like get paid all this money and teachers get paid that. And I'll see the argument there, but I just think I don't think it's a back and forth opinion for you to believe, hey, I believe that this player should get paid a lot of money, right? They're worth a lot of money. I hope my team doesn't do it, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think you and I agree for the most part. We're just disagreeing in how we want to call it. I do find it interesting, though. I was working on BYU Sports Nation this morning, and our opening topic, so like usually we do like the rundown for the show. If you ever watch the show, I guess you know, but have you ever watched BYU Sports Nation? I never watched it before I worked on it.
Yes, I have watched it
So
before.
like the opening segment is called What's Trending, and basically they take the biggest topic that there is to talk about, because when it's a local sports show, it's like pretty hard. But they basically just went on a 15-minute rant about Colin Cowherd. So I think it's funny that we're essentially arguing about Colin Cowherd as well. And like I said earlier, Colin Cowherd's like one of my biggest, like he is my icon. Like that's what I aspire to be. So I find it interesting that we're just taking shots at him all the time. It's also funny that he says he's pro player, but he hates Baker Mayfield, and Baker Mayfield, like I talked about yesterday, wants to be in Cleveland, which is less than you can say for any quarterback in Cleveland in the past 20 years.
And this is my exact point, is that Colin Cowherd is not anti-player. Like, I think he's ridiculous, but I don't think that him going after Baker Mayfield is anti-player. I think that makes him anti-Baker Mayfield. I don't think that makes him anti-player. And so that's my thing, right? Is that when I hear like this whole, you don't like that, like for example, Clippers fans right now who are basically gonna have to pay a year for Kawhi Leonard to sit there and not play,
which is dumb.
Right. I don't have a problem with Clippers fans being pissed about that. Right. I don't have a problem at all with Kawhi Leonard finessing his way into that contract. I don't have a problem with him doing that either. But I totally understand Clippers fans who are like, man, that freaking sucks, and we're sandbagged for a year and we will not win a championship this year. I think that both of those things are nuanced opinions, and neither one is anti-player. But yeah, he's like, I'm not a Baker Mayfield fan, but he does get some of like the most undeserved hate out of any player I think I've ever seen.
I actually love Baker Mayfield, but that's a separate conversation for a separate day. What isn't a separate conversation for a different day is something that I don't think anybody's really talking about, which kind of surprises me, because I feel like people usually... This just, the fact that nobody's talking about this just goes to show me that narratives aren't actually worth what they should be. Like there's a value and there's economy to different narratives. If you fall under a certain narrative during a certain season, then your story's important. But if your narrative doesn't fall under when the season is relevant, therefore your story's not relevant. Because if this story comes out, maybe even last year, the year before, everybody's like, oh yeah, pro women, pro this, pro that, whatever. But we have this story of Becky Hammon out here trying to get a job. This is the other reason that people aren't talking about this more, because Becky Hammon is actually doing this the right way. So Becky Hammon has been an assistant coach for the San Antonio Spurs under Greg Popovich since 2014. And the San Antonio Spurs absolutely love her. I'm not going to say whether or not their record the last 7 years is a reflection of her coaching. I don't know, but they have really nice things to say about her. So she comes out, she does an interview, a live interview on The Jump, on the show on ESPN, and she basically says that she wants to be an NBA head coach based on her merit, not to simply check a box. So my question to you is, does Becky Hammon deserve a job in the NBA? A head coaching job.
Right. I think for those of you who couldn't see, Brett put up his fingers in air quotes right there around the words deserve, because that's correct. Becky Hammon doesn't deserve an NBA head coach.
And that has nothing to do with her being a woman. That's just the fact that no one deserves anything.
Nobody deserves anything. Like, here's the thing. We have this conversation about owners, right? Who's the best player in both you and I's opinion, right? In both of our opinion, who's the best player to ever play?
In basketball?
Yeah.
Michael Jordan.
Is Michael Jordan a very good owner?
No, he's pathetic.
No, it's really bad, right? Your talent on the basketball court actually really doesn't have a whole lot to do with whether or not you be a good coach.
No.
Eric Spoelstra was literally a video intern. Like,
yeah.
And he's probably, I think every single year, he's one of the most underrated coaches in the entire NBA.
He literally got a team of like the Miami Heat that went to the finals. Like, I think people will forget about this when in like 10 years from now, people will forget that he went to the NBA finals with his only two relevant players being Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler.
100%. Dude overperforms with every single team that he has. And if there is underperforming, it's never from him. It's always from players. I've never seen Eric Spoelstra underperform with what he's had. And so here's my thing. There are always going to be trolls in Bleacher Report comment sections and in Twitter mentions who are saying sexist things. Always, always. You will never get rid of it.
And the fact that people get upset about that blows my mind.
That these people are looking for a reaction, so leave them. Like, don't even respond. It's not worth the couple seconds that it takes you to tweet at them. It really is not. Here's what we need to have the conversation. You and I were talking about this beforehand. Would it be any level of fair for you or I to play in the NBA?
No, because neither of you or I deserved it. Not that we didn't deserve it. We didn't earn it.
And not only do we not earn it, there are lots of physical differences between you, myself, and Bam Adebayo. There are a lot of differences.
There's a lot of differences between you, me, and the last guy on every roster in the NBA. The last guy on every team's Summer League, G League roster in the NBA.
It would be a disgusting case of thievery for us to make our way onto almost any college team, let alone NBA team.
Yes.
It's just that we are not physically built that way, right? The same as like a lot of these pro players. And I personally don't think my skill level is anywhere near a lot of these players.
It wouldn't make, because this is the thing that scares me the most about the world that we're entering into. The world that we live in right now, at least in America, is built on what's called a meritocracy. And we don't use that word a lot because I think it scares people who are very socialist and people who believe that everyone deserves everything. And there are certain basic things that I think everyone does deserve. But a meritocracy essentially denotates that you're given what's based on your merit. And the thing with the NBA is, here's the major reason that it wouldn't make sense for either of those teams to pick us up. Because we didn't deserve it, because we didn't earn it, but mostly because it wouldn't make any sense. Like, they would not benefit. The reason a company is going to hire you is because it's going to benefit them to hire you. Not because they like you, not because they think you're really sweet, but because you're going to be a benefit to them. You're going to make them look better. You're going to make them more money. And people get so upset about it, but that's the way that the world works. So the question you have to ask, if someone's not hired, like, let's say that we can somehow numerically find out who is actually more successful between Becky Hammon and Luke Walton, or insert some other like mediocre coach. Let's say we could find a way to numerically pinpoint who's a better coach. If you hire Luke Walton because he's a man, or because he has more experience, or whatever, if Becky Hammond, in this theoretical argument where her numerical value is higher than Luke Walton's and she's obviously a better coach, and you hire Luke Walton instead, you can be upset with whatever team hired him, but I wouldn't even be upset with them for hiring a man. I would be upset with them for being stupid. Because I don't care if you're a man, a woman, a purple, if you're a giraffe, a hippopotamus, an alligator. Like, I don't care what you are. If you're going to help me win basketball games, that's the thing that matters most. If you're going to help me make money, I do not care what you look like, where you're from, or what you've done. I don't care if you've never played basketball before. If you can help me win games, I don't care what you do. And so that's the issue here. It's not, oh, we should hire Becky Hammon because she's a woman. And I love that she has come out and said, I want to be hired because of my merits, because we live in a meritocracy, not because I happen to be a part of a group that was victimized for a long time. Like, she doesn't care about that. And that right there lets me know that she's serious about the job.
And not only that, the conversation that we were having earlier was about playing. And as Brett and I already acknowledged, I think you would agree, Becky Hammon probably would deserve to play in the NBA before we did.
Oh, yeah, she probably could, like, people I don't like to use the word misogynistic because I connotate that with, that word is associated with idiot to me. Like, I don't even like to talk about misogynistic people because I don't think that applies to a lot of people. But there's people who are like, oh, well, I could beat Becky Hammon one-on-one. Dude, like, honestly, if you didn't play high school ball and you didn't play college ball, there's no way you're beating Becky Hammon one-on-one. Like, she's probably better than you. Like, I was watching, I'm not even like a super like major feminist. I just happen to believe in equality, which is a super underrated quality in the world we live in today. But like I was watching,
You sexist pig.
I know, right?
Say that.
I was watching the Amanda Nunes fight a couple of months ago, and I'm there, and one of my friends.
Dude, she would murder boys.
I
She
was
would murder guys.
no. I'm there with my friends, and my friend's dad is there, and he's like, "Oh yeah, like she would honestly get railed if I went in the ring. Like I would absolutely kill her because she's a woman." I'm like, you obviously don't understand. Like that to me is misogyny. And not even misogyny, just straight up idiocy. Like you don't understand that you're not that talented, but you think you are because you have a certain form of genitalia. Like you're just not that good. So yes,
Now,
Becky Hammon deserves to play in the NBA more than you and I.
And also, like, let me ask you, if you and I were to say between her and the rest of the UFC, who would win their fights, what would you say?
Well, like she would obviously probably lose to most men in the UFC, but I think there's a lot of like if she was the same weight class and you got a dude that was like bottom tier of that weight class, I think she could win. Here's the other thing about those people. This is a separate conversation from Becky Hammon, so I'll steer it back, but I'll just say this. I'm sure, so my friend's dad who said he could fight Amanda Nunes, I'm sure you could say that, but I guarantee you if the opportunity was presented for you to get in the ring with her, you wouldn't do it. And you might say that you would, but you and I both know, and like you and I both know that you wouldn't do it. You, Jackson, wouldn't do it, and I wouldn't do it because I don't want to die.
Right. And here's the thing that people don't understand. I think every single male fighter in the UFC would probably clock Amanda Nunes. Probably.
Most of them, yes. 90% of the time, yes.
The difference, and here's the thing, it doesn't mean that Amanda Nunes couldn't destroy me, right? It means that what we're talking about, when we talk about a meritocracy, we are talking about the peak. We're not talking about the average. We are talking about the peak.
Yes.
For example, in a study in 2017, a team of researchers led by psychologist Stuart Ritchie, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Edinburgh, turned to data from the UK Biobank, which is an ongoing long-term biomedical study of people. It's got about 500,000 enrollees.
Okay.
Adjusting for age, on average, they found that women tended to have significantly thicker cortices than men.
What's
thicker cortices? It's like a section of your brain, right? It's like the really simple way to say it.
Okay.
And they have been associated with higher scores in a variety of cognitive and general intelligence tests, okay? Men had higher brain volume, right? That was generally going on. And here's what they noticed. They were pretty even in like brain volume generally, with men having a slight edge, 14 regions to 10 regions. So not that big of a difference. They were mostly the same. But volume and cortical thickness between men varies a lot more than between women. Let me translate what this means. A lot of the most intelligent people in the world are men. Also, most of the people in prison are men. It means that men generally take some of the highest IQ like places on earth for a variety of different reasons. And also, men end up in prison for stupid crap. Every single time you see a Florida man story, remember, it's because of the cortis size. That's usually what it's for. Women don't have as much variety, but they have a higher amount of them are not in prison because most women are not that stupid. And so the way to think about this, the average is the same when it comes to like the ability to think and use your brain. Men and women are mostly the same. When it comes to physical performance, you would say that like if you look at the averages, men are higher than women when it comes to physical performance in sports. The average is higher. And that's why when we talk about like the NBA and the WNBA, there's an obvious talent gap because the skill at the NBA is much higher on average than the talent at the WNBA. And we're talking about the best of both.
Yes.
And so when we talk about that, we're not saying that all men could beat a WNBA team. Most men could not, because we're talking about the top of women, like the top 1% of women, right? Less than 1%, like the top percent of women playing basketball could destroy the average guy.
Yeah.
But they would get whacked by the top percent of men physically because on average there's differences, right? When it comes to how you coach, that's extremely different. Because Becky Hammon, while she would get posterized by Bam Adebayo, right, or any point guard that she was probably guarding in the NBA, when it comes to coaching, there is no statistical difference on average between men and women in terms of brain capacity and power. People who are good coaches don't have to have been really good players. Luke Walton is the prime example. I wouldn't call him a good coach by any stretch of the imagination, but I would argue more people know who Luke Walton is because he was a coach than a player, would be my argument. And he's because he watched the game and he's able to coach. I would argue not very well as compared to the rest of the NBA, but he can coach. So when we have conversations about Becky Hammon, I have not met very many NBA fans who are male that have a problem at all with Becky Hammon becoming a head coach because they respect Becky Hammon's ability to coach. She is the first person to ever coach as a female in the NBA. When on December 30th, I think it was, in a game against the Lakers, I think, Popovich was ejected in the second quarter because he's Greg Popovich and that's what he does. Genius. And she coached the rest of the game. She did fine. They lost because it was the Lakers and it's the Spurs, but she did fine. I wouldn't have a problem at all with Becky Hammon being a good coach. When we talk about players, it's a completely different issue because we're talking about two different completely sets of data. We're talking about completely different sets of data. Mentally, there is no difference between men and women statistically, on average. And so they could be really good coaches. If you put a girl in there and you try and have her dunk on LeBron James, it will end with a corpse. And it's not about sexism. It's about looking at the statistical evidence and data in front of you. Can you make an objective point and a decision? I would argue that Brett and I can because we look at it and we're like, hey, listen, men and women aren't different in terms of coaching. They're different in terms of physical playing ability. That's it. And it's not even like a value thing. It's just a difference.
No, I love this idea of Becky Hammon being hired because she's not coming out and saying I should be hired because she's a woman. And to her point, that was how they directed the question on The Jump, of course, because ESPN likes to spin certain narratives. But she literally said, this is a direct quote, you have to hire the best person. So she also said it's something that can't be checking the box. Because if that's the case, you no longer get the best product. And if that's the case, we're going to start we would
she can all have Luke Walton's job right now.
Exactly. We would all be pissed if, wouldn't you be pissed if, and I'm going to sound like a huge jerk right now, but I'm going to say it. So let's say, who's your favorite NFL team? Who's probably one you watch the most if you had to?
Colts, probably.
Okay. So what if the Colts said, well, you know what? We could draft Derrick Henry. We could. But you know what? Instead, we're going to draft James Conner because he overcame cancer. And cancer is really hard and really bad. And I am not at all being derogatory towards people who overcome cancer. Like, my grandma had cancer. Like cancer is not one of those things that, I'm messing around with. But I'm saying, this is a meritocracy where people are trying to make money based on the quality of the product that they're taking in. We are not just drafting people because they happen to align with groups that have been through really hard things. And I love Becky Hammon because she actually wants to work and earn the job that she's given, which is such a lost art in today's world.
Actually, Quinn Snyder, right? Jazz head coach. He worked under Popovich. He was a good coach in and of himself, right? But part of the value that the Jazz saw in Quinn Snyder was that he worked in a Popovich system. There are so many Greg Popovich coaches who are spread throughout the entire NBA, right? There are tons of them. And working with Greg Popovich is what makes it valuable. It's no different with Becky Hammon. She learned from probably one of the greatest coaches to ever coach the sport. And that is really valuable. She has played professionally in the WNBA. She understands basketball. The players respect her. Actually, let me read this real quick. It's actually a direct quote. Let me find this. It's a direct quote from Paul Gasol. And he said, I've played with some of the best players of this generation, and I've played under two of the sharpest minds in the history of sports, in Phil Jackson and Greg Popovich. And I'm telling you, Becky Hammon can coach. I'm not saying she can coach pretty well. I'm not saying she can coach enough to get by. I'm not saying she can almost coach at the level of NBA male coaches. I'm saying Becky Hammon can coach NBA basketball, period. You'll notice he doesn't say anything in there about playing because that's not what we're talking about. But when it comes to coaching, Becky Hammond could definitely coach in the NBA. I would be if I was like if she fit the offensive scheme and the direction that I was going, I would have no problem hiring Becky Hammond at all. In fact, if you are that way and you think like people should earn things based on like what group they like check the box for, why would you not hire her immediately? Do you know how many like people you would bring in? It's one of the reasons actually why I'm shocked that like Colin Kaepernick hasn't been signed to an NFL team. Whichever NFL team decided to sign Colin Kaepernick, regardless of how you feel about the protests or whatever, or him kneeling, how many Kaepernick jerseys would you immediately sell? Immediately. Yeah. It even as a marketing thing, it's a good idea, let alone the fact that she is a qualified coach.
Yeah. And I love this because, I mean, I didn't understand being like, I wasn't as pro women as I am now until I had little sisters. And now I live in a world where I'm like, I want my sisters to be able like to grow up with the belief that, and I want to have daughters. Like I want my sisters and my future daughters to grow up with the belief that if they work hard enough, they can have whatever dream they want and they can go chase it. And I would much rather have Becky Hammon as an example to look up to, as opposed to Megan Rapinoe as an example to look up to, where Megan Rapinoe just says certain people are bad because they belong to certain groups and certain people are good and should have the world because they belong to certain groups. I love this from Becky Hammon. I hope she gets a job, and it wouldn't surprise me with the, I don't want to say political ideology because I think she deserves the job regardless, but I think she will have a job here soon in the NBA. Someone else who just got a new job, that's our boy Russel Westbrook, who we talked about earlier. So Russel Westbrook yesterday was introduced in a press conference to the Los Angeles Lakers, dyed his hair a little bit, separate story, but they were interviewing him, first press conference, and Russel Westbrook claims that he said, he said, I proved people wrong when I made it to college, when I got drafted to the NBA. So he's come out and said that he doesn't feel he has anything left to prove. That he said that in his interview yesterday. He said he doesn't have anything left to prove. What does that tell you about Russell Westbrook, and is that factual?
If I'm LeBron James and I hear that, I'm really concerned. Because if he doesn't have that hunger and he doesn't have anything left to prove, what's the point of bringing him? What was the whole point? If your whole point is that you want to bring in a third star who's going to help you win a title, then how do you feel that once he gets there, he's like, I don't have anything left to prove. I'm just here to play basketball. Why is that not immediately so concerning to you if you're LeBron James? If you're Anthony Davis, I don't have any clue why it is that everybody that was sitting there didn't just look at him and was like, what was going on? Here's like Rob Pelinka. I don't understand why he didn't just like look at him and just be like, are you serious right now? Like, the whole reason we brought you here.
Just Ayo cut his mic.
Really. And here's my other problem. Russell Westbrook, I don't know his personal story that well, right, in terms of, like, his journey to college. If he proved people wrong, wonderful. That's awesome for him. If he proved people wrong getting into the NBA, wonderful. That's awesome for him. He beat the expectations at the time. Your expectations shift depending on how good or bad you are at what you're doing. For example, if you have, let's say, Brett, you're a teacher, okay, and you have a pupil who has like 4.0,
okay,
right? And he's so good at school, right? Knows everything about what he's doing, always on top of things, and then he bombs 4 tests in a row. Are you concerned?
Well, yeah. I think I'm more concerned than I would be from the idiot who just bombs all the time anyway.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. The issue here with what Russell Westbrook is saying is, number one, it's garbage. Like, it doesn't make any sense in any facet, because the thing Russell Westbrook has not, what Russell Westbrook has proved to us that he's talented. He's proved that over and over and over. He's proved to us that he can average triple-double. Not very many people can do that. He's one of the best basketball players on earth. What he has not proved is that his talents and skills translate to wins, which is the entire reason Durant left in the first place when they were at OKC. It's the whole reason he left was because he was like, if I play with Russ, I'm not going to win a title. That's the whole reason he left. It's the whole reason that Westbrook was no longer with Harden. Like, it's this weird thing where I'm like, yes, he beat the expectations before. That doesn't mean that the expectations that are on him right now don't apply, or that he can just wave them off. He's in the NBA. There are expectations for being in the NBA. and now there's more expectations on you because you're playing with LeBron James. At least with him and Kevin Durant, he was like holding up the roster. Like they were both holding up the roster. At least when it was just him on OKC, he was carrying them. At least like with the Wizards, it was like, well, they were always going to suck. He has no excuses at all this campaign. He's playing with 2 of the top 5 players in the NBA when healthy. And he's not even being asked to like facilitate. He's being asked to score buckets and improve his 3-point shot a little bit. If he doesn't win a ring here, if Russell Westbrook doesn't win a ring here, he won't ever win a ring. He won't do it.
Everyone has that relative or person in your friend group who, for whatever reason, cannot keep a job, right? So you have that friend or that relative who every 3 months they're unemployed or they're out of a job. And then 3 months come along and they've had another one and it's come and gone. And the question always is, but they're like your relative or their friend, right? So you're like, oh, well, he's such a good guy, or like he's so this and he's so that. And it's like, okay, well, the facts tell me that there is a disconnect somewhere. You know, like he might be the nicest guy in the world. Maybe he doesn't show up on time. He might be the nicest guy in the world, willing to give the shirt off his back, but maybe he doesn't shower ever before he goes to work. You can say whatever you want about Russell Westbrook, and it is incredible that he has been able to do so much with a triple-double, to manipulate statistics like he owns them. But if you tell me that you don't have anything to prove, usually I'm okay with that. To me, but if I'm okay if you feel like you don't have anything to prove because the only person you care about proving anything to is yourself, I'm okay with that. But when things are obviously public and you obviously have glaring flaws, that's when I have an issue. Like, Buddy Hield has nothing to prove to me. Because Buddy Hield, I know exactly what he is, and I'm not looking for him to be the greatest of all time. LeBron James does have something to prove to me because he's made claims that he is the greatest of all time. So you have to prove to me that you are the greatest of all time. Steph Curry has proved to me, like Steph Curry has nothing left to prove to me. He's won championships, he's won MVPs, and he's the greatest shooter to ever live. Russell Westbrook, he's in that weird stage where it's like you can either choose to be Buddy Hield right now or you can choose to be LeBron James. Like if you want to be what we all know that you are, then you're right. You have nothing left to prove. If you want to be just another guy who gets paid way too much to affect the team way too little, if that's what you want to be.
Side note for what Brett's saying, Russell Westbrook is the highest paid player on the Lakers at this moment.
So you're telling me he's making more money than LeBron James?
And Anthony Davis. He's making $44 million right now. Which is higher than both of them.
Yeah, because that's the contract. I don't remember who originally signed that deal because I can't remember. It definitely wasn't Washington. It might have been, but he was traded to Houston. So it wasn't Houston. So it was probably
it was OKC.
Yeah, it was the deal that OKC originally signed him to, which is funny because they only had to basically play out 1 year of that. And then 3 separate teams have had to play 3 separate parts of that. But Russell Westbrook's basically in a situation right now where you get to tell all of us how you want us to perceive you, how you want to be looked back on throughout history. Because your trajectory for your legacy was so high. It was unprecedented, essentially, because you took this team where probably the greatest young core of 3 players, I would argue, in the history of basketball, when you had James Harden, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant all on the same team, and they went toe-to-toe with LeBron James, the Miami Heat, with one of the greatest teams of all time. And you played really well, considering how young everybody was. And then you showed us that you are the relative who can't keep a job. Everybody says that they like playing with him. Like Steven Adams said that he's one of his favorite teammates he's ever had. Like a lot of these guys have said the same thing. So where's the disconnect, Russ? Because we all, like, the writing is on the wall. We just don't know who put it there. We don't know why it's there. But we do know that you're on your 4th team in 4 years. So there's obviously an issue. I would argue that part of it comes back to me being pro money. You cost too much for people to keep you to do too little. That's what people are like, oh, well, minimum wage should be raised. You do a job to me that's worth me paying you that much. That's worth me being afraid of you going somewhere else. So I pay to keep you. Until then, don't come at me with you should make more money. Russell Westbrook is costing too much money to not get you far enough. And for you to say that you have nothing left to prove, I understand that he thinks that that's his way of saying, I'm my own man, I don't care what other people think. But to the rest of us, that sounds like, yeah, I'm pretty content with my place in history. I'm not really that worried that much about improving it all. Like, I'm just happy with where I'm at. And complacency is the enemy of greatness.
And like, as much as like I know that he doesn't want to talk about it, 2011-2012 season was the last time that Russell Westbrook was in the finals, and they lost.
That was probably also the farthest he's been in. Like, has he made it out of the first round of the playoffs since then? Well, I guess he would have when Kevin Durant was there, but other than Kevin Durant's last year, that was the farthest that he's been since.
Right, and the ironic thing is the last time he was in the finals, he lost to a LeBron James team.
Now he's playing with LeBron.
Now he's playing with LeBron. He literally, he's on the complete other side. He doesn't have an excuse, and I'm sorry. When you go to work, Brett, like, have you been like a pretty good employee? Do you think? I think so. You think you've met expectations like the last, like, let's say 2-3 weeks?
I would honestly argue that I have exceeded expectations, but that's a different story.
Right. So you have at least met standards for your job. Does that mean that if you go in tomorrow and you don't like meet expectations that you're not going to get fired?
I probably wouldn't get fired tomorrow, but if I kept doing it for a while, I probably would get fired. Right.
Everybody would have a problem with you.
Yes.
Right. If you went in tomorrow and you screwed around.
Yeah.
Right. And you were just like, yeah, no, I don't have any standards.
Especially because when you work on live TV, everyone can see it and it causes a lot of issues.
Right. The idea of I don't have anything to prove, you always have something to prove. That's the reason you're on this team. The reason they brought you in is because you have something to prove. Otherwise, they wouldn't have brought you in because you are he has one of the highest usage rates in the NBA. His entire career, he's had one of the highest usage rates in the NBA.
Which is probably a little bit of a red flag.
Which is probably a massive red flag, especially because he's not going to have the highest usage rate on this team. Not if he plans on not getting traded.
Yeah, not if he plans on winning basketball games.
And so Russell's entire career can be summed up by this. He's a phenomenal basketball player who is physically talented beyond almost anybody we've ever seen. But I'd argue if
he's a phenomenal athlete. He's probably one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen in basketball.
Sure. And he doesn't win by himself. He doesn't win without help. He doesn't do it. And the years where he has not had help, he has been on the Wizards, and it was him and Bradley Beal, who, I mean, not to slander Bradley Beal, but Bradley Beal's okay with staying with the Wizards. Sans Russell Westbrook.
Yes.
And the other time that he had no help, no talent, was when he was with OKC. And he had his like amazing season that was phenomenal and great. But they didn't, like, they got what they have, what they do.
And
Nothing.
To that point, even when he has had help, he has still struggled because they gave him a Carmelo Anthony who was just coming out of the prime of his career and a Paul George who finished second in Defensive Player of the Year voting that year, and they still couldn't get anywhere.
And that's the other thing. That's the problem I brought the other day was Russell Westbrook doesn't have much to prove in the regular season. He doesn't have anything to really prove.
No, he's like one of the greatest regular season basketball players of all time, but nobody cares about that if you don't win a championship.
And he, in the postseason, regularly disappoints you. Regularly. He becomes a liability at the three-point line. Regularly, he does stupid things late in games. He regularly becomes a problem instead of a solution for the team. This is his chance to prove that. And if he doesn't see this as his chance to prove people wrong, then they're not going to win a championship. Like, it's one thing if one player on the Lakers decides to go rogue and be a moron because LeBron James is good enough to carry the team anyway. J.R. Smith, anyone. But Russell Westbrook becoming a problem for this team because he doesn't care about proving people wrong about his style of basketball not working. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I get it, he's got money. I get it, he's got a family. I understand all that stuff. There are more important things than basketball. But in your professional career, people are saying you can't do this. They have been saying it for a while. And this is your chance to prove them wrong. And if you don't care about proving them wrong, then that's fine.
Then don't say you can.
Then that's what I'm saying. If you're going to do Do it. Don't tell me. Do it.
Your legacy is defined by whatever you want it to be defined by. I used to be under the impression that everyone needed to know what their passion was for a career in life and chase it. I don't believe that anymore. I believe passions are important, but I don't believe careers are. If your legacy is that you want to be an amazing husband and father and you don't really care what you do for a living, I applaud you for that. If you want your legacy to be that you want to be a stay-at-home mom and you want to build your kids into the greatest men and women that they possibly can be, I have no problem with that. But do not tell me that you want your legacy to be X, and then when you fail to perform at X because you fail to work hard and make the rows around you better, do not then come at me and say, oh, well, I didn't really care about that anyway. You then move the goalpost on something that you originally set. And that's where I have an issue. Russell Westbrook, dude, if you don't want to be the greatest if you don't want to be a great point guard, then I don't care. But you obviously do, because you go for all these triple doubles and you want to score points and you want to look good on the record books. So either figure out a way that playing your game wins basketball games, or don't, but don't try to be both and move the goalpost when it becomes convenient for you. My other question to you, so LeBron James is the longest tenured player on this Lakers team because Kuzma's gone, KCP is gone, all the boys that they originally drafted are gone.
Can I just real quick before you ask me what you're gonna ask me? Can I just tell you, Kuzma's one of the goofiest people I've ever met on, I've ever seen on planet Earth.
Did you see that article that he wrote?
Dude's such a goofball, bro. Yeah, I saw it.
He wears backwards jeans. No one likes him. And he comes out and writes this article. He's like, "Dear my Laker family." I'm like, bro, no one in 20 years is going to remember that you ever even A, played for the Lakers, and B, played professional basketball. And that's no slight to him, like, compared to me, because I could never play professional basketball. We talked about that. But, like I feel like he thinks he's worth more than he is. And I hope that he has a better record or a better career after this, but like he isn't what he thinks he is.
I hope it works out better. Like, I think, like, on the topic of like hope, like thinking you're better than you actually are, I hope it works out for him better than Dennis Schroeder. I'm just saying, typically people who their teams are willing to let them go to seek more money, generally it doesn't end very well for them.
That's the other thing about the whole Dennis Schroeder thing is, again, I'm the guy who I tell you, like, you can only have championships or money. In this situation, you had a better chance winning a championship with the team that was going to give you more money. You took less money to have a lower chance of winning a championship. That I do not understand.
Ego, man, it kills people. It's all about the ego. But what were you going to say?
So what I was going to ask you is, I think this adds a lot more to LeBron James' resume if he wins a championship with this team, because, like, the one thing we can say, the one drawback to being 6-0 in the finals is that you essentially ran with the same team every year. I love Michael Jordan. I think he's the greatest of all time, but the one slight is he couldn't win in more than one place. At least we don't know that he could. With LeBron James, we know that he can win in different situations. And evident by the fact that he literally pulled this Los Angeles Lakers team who hadn't been to the playoffs in 6 years and took them to a championship that year with Alex Caruso, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Danny Green, and the boys. And now he, once again, is the longest tenured person on that team. There is not a single, like, weird old vet who's been on that team for a super long time that we all just went unnoticed. Like, he has been on that team longer than anyone else. I think that has to say so much about his career that we're not talking about. That he literally just throws teams together and runs to the playoffs and runs to championships with them.
I think that's correct with two things the only two things I would say about it. If he gets injured this year for more than a third of the season, right? Like, I'll give any NBA player actually a third of the season. Injury, like, especially if it's not season ending, I will give any NBA player a third of the season, right? Before I start to be like, no, you're becoming a liability. If even like Kawhi Leonard, right? I'm like, if Kawhi Leonard's there for the playoffs and he misses the first 25, 30 games, who cares? Really? Like, at the end of the day, who cares?
No.
Here's my thing. LeBron needs to be available for 66, 70% of the season. Right, he needs to be available for that, and he needs to be available for the playoffs. Otherwise, number one, I just don't think the team will win. But number two, any success there, it's just a hodgepodge. That LeBron James at that point is the GM. Like, you give him success as the GM, not as the player. But the other thing is, the only slight that I see coming your way from Michael Jordan fans is that what they will say is that LeBron couldn't win in different situations. LeBron James could win in different locations with different people, but the situation, LeBron James has not ever won in a situation where he was not the GM of the team.
True.
If that makes sense.
But I don't find that as an issue.
I don't inherently find it as an issue either. I'm just saying,
because if Michael would have done it, we would have been like, oh my gosh, look how smart Michael was to build this team.
Well, the only difference that I see is that, like, with Michael Jordan, right? You and I talked about this, like, a while ago when we were talking about Aaron Rodgers, right? The Jerry Krause thing, right? Michael Jordan won in spite of Jerry, right? Like, in spite of Jerry attempting to, like, turn himself into, like, some weird, like, fantastical GM, Michael still won. Right?
True, but let's not act like Michael didn't command certain things because he was one of the greatest players of all time and the best player in the league. Like, he definitely had some kind of say in a lot of decisions that were made.
I agree with you, and I'm on your side on this. I'm just saying, like, part of the pushback you're going to get from that group is going to, it's the same thing as the health thing, right? Or not the health thing, but like the teammates thing. They'll be like, the only help that Michael Jordan ever had, while it was extremely substantial help, was Dennis Rodman and like Scottie Pippen
and Steve Kerr.
Right. And what they'll say is LeBron James played with Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh. He played with Anthony Davis. You have a point about the Cleveland teams. I just think that's like what they're going to throw back at it. And it's getting to the point now. I think the more we have this conversation, the more I'm like, at the end of the day, like, not only who cares, but how can you even sort through it? You know what I mean? There's so many different like points and counterpoints, and the narrative is always changing. It's hard to have it will, you can have the conversation when they retire, but at this point, having the conversation, I'm like, I don't even, the narrative is always shifting so much that I don't like for example, if they had never gotten Russell Westbrook,
people were still going to have an issue with it though because of the Anthony Davis trade, and that's what lets me know that the argument has been somewhat fabricated and weighted in favor of Michael Jordan, irrespective of what LeBron James literally went to the NBA Finals with lawn furniture, and people want to ignore that. If Michael Jordan would have done that, we would have talked about how him and God are in contention for greatest beings of all time.
Oh, you're gonna get my house struck with lightning, bro.
I figured I'm already on my way there.
I just when it comes to the Michael Jordan LeBron James debate, I really do think it's pointless to have the conversation until they're both retired, because at that point you can then look at all the achievements and you can line them up. It's really hard to compare a currently playing player. It's like the stupid thing that Skip and Shannon always do when they talk about like Luka Doncic and like Larry Bird.
Yeah.
It's the stupidest argument because it's like, number one, they do not play the same way at all.
No, they play different positions.
They're completely different in their play style. Like,
yes.
Luka is not very good at three-pointers. You know what I mean? Like, Larry Bird was, like, won a three-point shooting contest in a jacket. You know what I mean? Like, they're not the same player. But also, like, I don't think Larry Bird could carry a team the same way that Luka could.
Interesting.
This is me personally. I think if you put Luka on that, like, do you think that Larry Bird could penetrate the way that like Luka could? Not post, but like penetrate, like slash. I don't think so. I don't think Larry Bird was anywhere near as good of a passer as Luka. But also, like, Luka, even though he controls a lot of his team, like, even though like he does all those things, Larry Bird's got rings. Luka does not, and age is mostly the reason for that. And so I don't even understand why having the conversation even works. They're like, Luka's not done. Larry is done. And they played in, like you talked about it yesterday in the podcast. The game evolves. Like, they played in different eras. Yep. Larry Bird would get removed from existence if he played today, and Luka would have been stabbed behind the court, like behind the stadium.
Maybe even on the court, to be honest.
Might have done. I've seen some of those fights, like some of the things that they have on camera. I mean, Larry Bird himself got into a whole bunch of scraps. I think Larry Bird in his prime would clap Luka directly in the forehead.
Yeah. And everybody would have been okay with it. I wasn't inciting that to say that, oh, we should have the conversation LeBron James is better than Michael. I'm just one of those people who is under the opinion that we shouldn't. I don't honestly think the conversation really matters. If you believe LeBron James is the GOAT, awesome. If you believe Michael's the GOAT, awesome. If you believe Kareem's the GOAT, I can't argue that because I didn't grow up watching Kareem. So my only thing is, I'm just saying, let's not discredit LeBron James. I think he deserves more credit, and I do find it very significant that he's been able to just throw teams together out of the woodworks, not have 10 years playing together, i.e. Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls, and then for them to win basketball games the way they have.
And I also think, this is again my personal opinion, the LeBron James hatred comes from a specific segment of sports fans who are usually also politically minded a certain way.
Facts.
And they prefer the, we say boomer talk, right, of like everything in my era was harder and different, we walked uphill in the snow both ways, that kind of thing. And listen, you can look at, I do this. I disagree with LeBron on almost every single social issue. Almost every single one. In fact, it actually irritates, we can have this conversation another time, but like it irritates the freak out of me when athletes speak on social issues. It doesn't irritate me when they speak on, it doesn't.
We should have that conversation because I disagree with you actually, and you and I think politically a very similar way.
Actually, let me clarify. I don't have a problem with people speaking their mind and being very like active on social issues. My problem comes when we see an athlete speak on social issues and we think that they're credible because they're an athlete. That's where my problem, like my problem with Megan Rapinoe has nothing to do with her kneeling. It has to do with everybody's like, she's a girl and therefore she can speak on like social issues because she plays like she's a girl and she's also LGBT on the women's team. No, like what makes her credible, like in sports, is that she's good at sports. It doesn't make her credible in any other. Would you go to a doctor and he's like, yeah, I studied finance, and then let him operate? No. Right? And so that's my problem. I don't have a problem at all with athletes speaking out. I have a problem with people treating athletes like they're experts because they're part of any minority group or because they have a certain political persuasion. It's the same thing with people who are conservative, right? People who are like Brett Favre, right? Brett Favre like says things that are political all the time, and I'm like, yep.
That's the same dude who was literally sending pictures of his penis to Sports Illustrated reporters. Like, I don't trust him for my like health opinions.
Just a general rule of advice for everybody, like, and I think I speak for Brett as well. The people who are icons and like you should look up to in your life generally aren't talking a whole like you can admire things about people. Role models are role models. Role models are not athletes. Role models are not politicians. It doesn't mean that you can't have a politician or an athlete who is a role model, but look up to them because they're a role model, not because they're an athlete or because they're a politician.
Just because I look up to Colin Cowherd as an icon because he has a career that I emulate, but by no means do I look up to Colin Cowherd for my opinion on the coronavirus vaccine. And Colin, like he said this before, like he wouldn't want people to do that. I don't understand why people get so upset with people like why people get upset with Joe Rogan for when he says what he says about the vaccine. Who cares? Joe Rogan has no credibility. So therefore, if you believe everything that Joe Rogan says about the vaccine, first of all, he can say whatever opinion he wants. But if you take his opinion as fact, that has everything to do with your incompetence and has nothing to do with the fact that he knows he's not credible. He's just giving an opinion. So if you're upset with him, you should be upset with the idiots who took opinion as fact from someone who wasn't credible at all.
Well, it's actually the same thing. If you agree with like me and Brett on an issue, right, any sports thing, then you agree with us on a sports thing. If actually this is my thing, right? This is what I'll leave it as. But when it comes to any conversation, I lean one way politically. I do. But if I can have the entire conversation with you without having to ask you a single question, I know that you don't have a credible opinion on something. For example, if I can have a conversation with you on tax policy, right? Or like, should taxes go up or down? And every single thing coming out of your mouth is a conservative talking point, or every single thing coming out of your mouth is a left talking point, then we have a problem. I don't have a problem with people who lean right or lean left.
Yes.
But if every single thing that you say is a copy paste of the Marxist doctrine, or it's a copy paste version of like anything you've heard Ben Shapiro say, then we have a problem because it means that there's no critical thinking. You can agree with people on issues, right? I lean right on a lot of issues. It doesn't mean that every single position I hold is right because I'm a critical thinker.
Or because it's right because it's right. Like, you should never believe something that happens to be left because it's left. You should believe it because you happen to believe it. And you should know why you believe certain things. And I'm going to make this announcement live while we're recording the podcast. Jackson and I have talked about this, but I'm just going to do this. I think what we're going to start doing is, because we usually do like sports 4 days a week. I think our Saturday show, I think what we're going to do, and you and I talked about this, I think we should take this conversation we're having right now, put a pin in it, and have this conversation on Saturday and a couple other socially relevant issues. And if you don't want to like hear politics mixed with your sports, we're not going to do that, because like I don't really feel like that's our place. Like, we're just going to tell you truth. But maybe what we'll do is we'll take this conversation that we're having right now and we'll save this and a couple other social talking points and just culture talking points regardless of sports, and put that all on our show on Saturday morning. How's that sound?
I'm down for it.
Okay, sounds good. We're going to leave it with that. Hopefully Russell Westbrook decides that he has something to prove, and hopefully the Dak Prescott and the Cowboys figure out what's going on with his shoulder, because he's having another MRI up here coming soon, which means that my Washington football team is guaranteed to win the NFC East, and the way they played the Buccaneers in that playoff game last year leads me to believe that they can make a run at the table. Y'all have a good one. Just keep winning.
Sheesh.
Hey, yo, Babs, this shit crazy.